Hi, everybody. My name is Michael King. I am your host tonight here on our inspirational interview with David Shkolny. He's hailing from Edmonton, Alberta, my old stomping grounds. David specializes in soft pastel landscapes, drawn by their boundless potential for exploration and interpolation. He finds the direct, immediate nature of soft pastels compelling as it demands a delicate touch and acute sensitivity that aligns perfectly with the landscape. And you can find David online at sachiart.com/David Shko. You don't make it easy, do you? And also on Instagram, his handle is David SHK. Yeah, that's right. Welcome. Thank you very much for joining us with this interview. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Michael. I'm really happy to be here and happy to see some familiar faces out there too.
Oh, I bet. Yeah, all these names popping up. I'm going to go through about a dozen paintings on screen here. But as I do, if you can just tell us about your artist journey from kind of when you started to now, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah, I'll try to keep that short because it's long. It's like 4+ decades. But
Oh, damn. Well, you got 14 images, so I'll time you through that.
well, I was just telling Michael just before we kind of started that my best friend and I started painting and drawing together just like over 40 years ago in Fort Saskatchewan, where I am right now, actually. We're still painting, going out and painting together just very recently. It was really nice being in a small town to have a friend that kind of get into art as much as you did. And because it's basically small towns are about sports. Not that I have anything against that. Progressing from there, I was always interested in landscape. When I was about 10, I got a book on William Kurelek from an aunt and uncle. And it just sort of really turned me on way back when I was even like 10 or so years old. It's always drawn me doing landscapes, something about the journeying into the picture and just kind of creating something that is a lot about color because my greatest love is color. Moving down the road a little bit, I entered college after high school and studied to get my fine arts degree at Red Deer College at the time. It's now Polytechnic. And then I graduated from Nova Scotia College of Art and Design just over 30 years ago, and then found my way back to Alberta. And the 90s were not a really productive time for me art-wise. I went back to college. I studied graphic design. I did a few things in the 90s, but I didn't kind of resume the mantle until about 2001 when I sort of out of the blue, I started teaching at MacEwan University in the design department. So I was teaching drawing a lot. And that just reignited my love for drawing to begin with. And what did I pick up right away? I picked up pastels because that was my thing. I first sort of used them in college in Red Deer, and I loved everything about them, the feel of them, the sound of them on the paper. The big thing was, yeah, just the color and how the color of the paper had a big impact on the piece, how the color of the paper could come through. That's sort of a nutshell version of
That's
the last
great. Thanks.
decade.
Yeah, I have to agree with you too. There's nothing like pastels, right? That feeling of whether it's a harder Rembrandt or softer Unison or heaven forbid a Terry's on that sanded paper. I mean,
Yeah.
Kansas is nice, but it's that sanded paper and there's that sound and that texture. It's just
Hmm.
so tactile.
Yeah.
It's amazing. I have to agree with you there. If it wasn't for having to frame them, I think I'd probably be still painting in them.
Oh, we'll have to talk about that sometime. I didn't know you did much pastel.
Yeah, I did back in the day. Yeah, it was all high realism though, stuff I just can't stand. But it's not about me, man. It's about you. So, so with pastels though, like on through Instagram, and I even checked online, I wouldn't know if you've ever used another medium. I'd probably have to go digging to find an acrylic or an oil. Everything seems to be pastel, right? With that, you use it from your quick studies to your larger pieces. You use it plain air. Yeah, I guess you have your system quite down pat then, eh?
Yeah, it's so immediate. I enjoy oil painting quite a bit. I tend to do for my oils, I tend to go a little bit more abstract, I would say, for the most part. I like playing with oils in a different kind of way. And I've done acrylic for a long time, but yeah, just the relationship you build with the medium that you use the most, it's just so within hand's reach, and you've got that vocabulary of kind of moves and stuff in your head already. So you don't have to wait for that paint to dry. You've got all these colors kind of laid out. Just grab them and yeah.
And that must be why you love color so much, because pastels are very much, I find, more associated with color than they are with value compared to
Hmm.
like oil paint or acrylic paint, right?
Right, yeah. And yeah, there's like for people who haven't done pastel, I'd say, in the last couple decades or so, the amount of colors available, it's like one brand is going to have like 400 plus different colors. like you mentioned, yeah, Terry Ludwig, you can get like 30 different whites, for example. So
Yeah, same with their darks, right? When their series of darks came out, I think everybody ate them
yeah.
up, right?
Oh yeah, their darks are great. Yeah. Yeah, and I've had an interesting theory about the crossover of pastel and painting in terms of people trying both or getting introduced to both. I kind of think, if you've got the color in front of you, you kind of, it makes you more sensitive to it. And pastel, the color's there. Oil, you're gonna, or acrylic, you have to mix the color up generally. So working in pastel, I think it can maybe improve your acuity of color a little bit when you move into like the more painterly kind of mediums, just because you know that color's there, you know you can make it.
Yeah,
It
that's an interesting way to think about it. Do you think with pastels, if you take the time to sort them through
hmm.
various values, that it may become easier, I guess, when creating interests such as breaking broken color, color, but all in the same value? It's easier than if you were to mix it.
Yeah, yeah, good point. Good jab there. I do not usually have mine. They're semi organized, but oh, it's a chore.
Uh,
It takes me
yeah.
like a couple of days to clean and sort.
Oh, no doubt, right? I mean, yeah, it's too much work to sort those things after a while. You do it once and then don't do it again, right?
Yeah.
Now, talking about, the Terrys when they came out with the whites and the darks, it got me thinking that, and looking at your work as well, how much these colors really only differ in temperature. I mean, sure, you could argue hue if you're going from a blue to a green, but really it's temperature. And looking at some of your pieces, I see a lot of nice temperature play. Do you think in temperature at all, or do you mostly a value color guy?
Yeah, a lot in temperature. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, good observation. Yeah. Yeah, and in particular, I would say when I get in the realms of more of the neutrals, it becomes a little more detailed, the grays and stuff like that. I'm really conscious of choosing color temperature. And I really like to, like, if you look at my work, a good portion of it, borrows a lot from kind of an impressionist scheme of colors where simultaneous contrast or like colors in similar values joined together. And they might be contrasting temperatures a bit too, but putting those together for me is really fun. I enjoy that play.
Yeah, yeah, for me as well, it has to be one of the best parts of paintings when you can
Yeah,
get it to work, right?
yeah.
Next to composition and all the other stuff that we have to deal with. But when I first found you on Instagram, it's through a mutual friend of ours, and you're painting a lot of figures and a lot of buildings. I think you're at a Ukrainian historical site or something like that. So it just was flooded with that. Okay, he's a building and figure guy, right? But as it turns out, you really love landscapes. Can you tell us more why that is?
Yeah, it might go back to just that early exposure. William Kurlak had a lot of figures in his paintings too, and that that sort of farm life kind of genre of his work. I can't quite pick apart why I prefer landscape as opposed to say figures really. It's just so close to me that I don't know exactly why. It's just it makes me feel at ease to do it. I love the history of landscape painting and I reference it a lot in my work. But I do like doing portraits as well and architecture, yeah. But it often kind of more for the challenge of it than expression of it, maybe.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, because you don't really shy away from figures or portraits or buildings or anything like that. So it's still in your wheelhouse. Do you handle it differently, do you think, than you would just a plain landscape?
In terms of how I set it up, not too much, a little slower, of course. I'll often use a very simple kind of grid system, just one vertical and one horizontal line, working from a photo, for example, which I'll imitate on my paper or whatever, and use that to line things up. But the stages are much the same. Yeah, I guess I try to really preserve freshness throughout the whole thing. And I think that's the challenge with painting portraits and figures, is keeping that freshness to the end, especially if you're working on something a bit smaller too. Like, some of the figures are pretty tiny and you're trying to get in there with this big block of pastel.
Oh, no, there's never an edge sharp enough, is there?
No, but that also makes it fun for me too, because I'm not hugely concerned about failure in terms of if it doesn't work. Pastels, as I said, you can work quickly and then I can just start again as long as my source material is good. So I've talked about this with other painter before. Yeah, there's sort of a metaphor for athletics or being an athlete to painting in some respects of making these moves and trying to see ahead a little bit and all that stuff. Yeah, there's sort of a bit of adrenaline back there pumping through.
Oh, yeah, very true, very true. Now, the fact that you brought up failure, I find always interesting with, and every artist is different. How do you handle failure, I guess as the word, not necessarily the act, as you see it in terms of when something doesn't work out for yourself, or when you go and submit something to a show that you know it's your top piece, but it gets rejected. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, I have some initial, let's say, to address if I've submitted something, some initial disappointment. Like I submitted something to a calendar recently that I've been submitting to for years. And I thought, oh, this is a perfect piece. And it didn't get submitted. And I'm initially disappointed, but really I don't dwell on it too much. I'm more concerned about keeping the work going and what am I going to do next. And regards to pieces, I like to take risks a lot. So I anticipate some things not working. And again, there's some disappointment, of course, but there's elation when you try something different and it does work. So there's a trade-off there. I've had pieces that I've wanted to destroy right away, and maybe I haven't, and then I've come back and I've resurrected them a bit, or I've seen something that I didn't see prior to that. It's okay. You can work on it, or it's good like it is. So it's not really cut and dried.
That's good. Yeah, it's everyone handles it differently. I think the more you get rejected, the more you just kind of fluff it off your shoulder and say, "What's next?" Right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Now you mentioned sort of pieces. You talked a little bit about pieces you're not happy with and reworking them, etc. So that brings up one piece that I read an article online about called Pond Life, and I'm just going to share that right now. And it developed, I guess, out of mishaps and misfortune, but emerged out of the ashes of your corner of your studio. And so, can you talk about the process of this piece? I find it fascinating.
Yeah, this wasn't the first piece that I used this sort of arcane kind of technique that I use now, but it was soon after I quote unquote discovered it. So there was a piece I was not happy with, and I thought, oh, I'll try to use some compressed air like you used to clean your keyboard and your computer with to blow off the pastel and keep the paper to use for something else. And it didn't quite work, and I just let it by the side there. And I had a friend, he was looking at it, he kind of liked it, and I was, oh, maybe there is something there. So after that, I just started kind of bringing the compressed air as a tool to make marks with the pastel. When you use it, it of course loosens takes some pastel off, but not in a predictable or regular kind of manner. It also, if you position it a certain way, the propellant inside there will drip onto the surface and make those kind of weird puddly things like you see in the water sort of streaking down. Yeah.
Yeah, kind of like
Yeah.
alcohol washes otherwise, right?
Yeah, yeah, which yeah, I do too. Probably know. Yeah, I use some isopropyl alcohol too to build up a bit of an underpainting. But a lot of like kind of foliage in the trees there, just kind of blowing off some pastel and putting some back on. Yeah, it's sort of maybe a bit like sculpture. You're putting stuff on and taking stuff off. So it sort of makes it a little more participatory. This sort of feel of kind of removing and putting stuff on.
Yeah, and especially with this piece, I think because it looks like it's a toned sanded paper, right? So you have
Yeah.
that benefit instead of just having a stark white underneath, right?
I think actually this one is it's already that kind of beigey color you see on the bottom.
Yeah.
Usually these days I'm toning paper, but I think that's the original color down there. It's kind of it was called Belgian mist, that color.
Oh yeah, made by Wallace, right? Good old Wallace
Yes.
company. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and I love your story about this piece because it wasn't going in the direction you wanted it. So you tried something new and it pushed it to a direction that was kind of there and you didn't really see it until someone came by your studio with fresh eyes and said, "Hey, that's pretty nice. It's very
Mm.
strong composition, right?" And I think
Yeah.
from there you decided, "Oh, I'll put it up on the easel again and rework it some to that end, right?"
Yeah, I'll get that air out quite a few times, especially if I'm kind of stuck too. It can kind of get you out of a stuck part by, if you do something to it, as I said, it's unpredictable. It can break that hold that you have maybe on a part that you really like in a piece. It can destroy it. It can really quickly remove work that you might have liked. So there's that sort of weird aspect to my work too, where I do kind of like this destructive sort of, maybe not the best word, this tendency, but I like to go in there and I just like to mess around with something I've done and see what will happen because there's
Oh
always
yeah,
the next.
your work never progresses unless you challenge yourself, right? And I think
Yeah,
that's a great piece to demonstrate it without a doubt.
thanks.
Now, this question is more about plein air painting than anything else. But when you go out there and you're walking around or you're driving around, eventually you go, "Whoa, that's it, that's it." What makes you stop and say, I'm gonna paint that"?
Okay, yeah, I do that a lot. I mean, I take a lot of photos to work from them, but plein air painting, that's a preference. Just as you know, there's just another world of painting available to you when you're outdoors. There's lots of things. It's kind of color relationships primarily. That's sort of general speaking, but you really kind of know it when you see it. I do tend to work with lights and darks quite a bit, so light and shadow. So I'll sort of see how that's illuminating the scene. And I do have a preference for a composition that's asymmetrical, and there's some kind of motifs that I'm drawn to, which are not entirely original, but I like to try put an original spin on them, like roads. I love the color of roads, all the different grays.
A phrase only an artist is going to say.
Yeah. And yeah, just the kind of potential within, framing, getting out there and how can I frame this? Do I have a lot of sky or a little bit of sky? Negative space. Yeah. Negative space is a huge thing I kind of think about when I'm looking, like how can I work negative space into this, especially with trees. When I'm teaching, I talk a lot about not dwelling too much on the positive space of trees, but kind of using the negative space strokes. So filling in around everything that isn't tree to make the tree. So it's both kind of, I think, philosophically kind of fulfilling as well as practical. See, because when we tend to, I think, focus right on that object, it can be overdone very quickly. But if you're just kind of moving next to it and kind of chunking it in, something happens that's different.
No, I agree with you 100% there. A tree always comes together when you're painting the outside of the tree, the negative shapes, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's probably the best advice I think you give anybody about painting trees, regardless if they're pine or poplar or whatever that everybody wants
Yeah.
to learn, right? Just paint the negative shapes.
Yeah, and it's something like when you look at history of landscape painting, you love negative space, you look for that all the time.
Yeah. So I guess in a sense, well, since you've been painting so long, you kind of have it inherently in your mind when something will catch your eye and you don't have to consciously think about it so much anymore, right?
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
true. Yep, it's a feel. Yeah, it's not okay, this is on my list, but I do search for, like we were talking earlier about color temperature. I will kind of search for that a little bit and see what I can play with that, especially with shadows. So, yeah.
for sure, for sure. Now, looking through all your work, I mean, it's consistent and you can tell it's yours, but you really move from representational to impressionistic, sometimes quite abstract and heavy composition kind of thing. But what prompts a painting to take a specific direction? And does it ever change thinking that you're going to be a little more representational, but all of a sudden it turns into heavy abstract?
Yeah, this is a good, very good question, and one that I hope I can answer with some detail, but we'll see. I would say the majority of the work I set out to paint representationally in pastel anyway, and there's different ways it can go. If I'm moving along and I feel like it's kind of going south, this is just completely honest, I'll just mess it up and like I was saying before, I'll sort of obliterate something, or I'll put in a big dominant sort of shape that reduces a lot of detail, really simplifies something, because I feel, oh, I've gone, I'm just messing around with this. I did this just yesterday too with a piece, simplify it down, and then I might go further and further and simplify and often just go against sort of rules that I have maybe held for a while about how to use pastels and, to not overdo it and don't put too much color down. I'll just start putting way too much down and then, yeah, just sort of mess it up. And just, it's a little bit more of a dialogue when it gets into abstraction, because you often don't know where it's going. You don't know what to do next. You don't know when it's done. So it's a very sort of edge of the seat kind of thing that I like. I don't despair when that happens. So that's basically how it mostly goes when I choose to go abstract.
That's so interesting. So that changes how I view about your work now. When I see now your abstract work, that was a piece that was going the wrong direction. And so you just decided to do something bold, right?
Yeah.
That's so funny.
That's, for some reason, that's mostly with pastel, but with oil, I find it easier to slip into working abstractly to begin with.
Yeah, there's
I've
something about
tried to
that
with
brush.
pastel, and I don't feel I've been successful. My intent is, okay, I'm going to do an abstract piece. So yeah, it just sort of slips in when I'm not looking.
It's interesting how different mediums, you react differently to different mediums. So now let's talk about one of your abstract pieces here. Just let me bring it up here. This one is Palisade slash Pyramid. What I have to say about it is on the edge of your style, I would say. I love to hear your take on this piece, specifically the bold contrast and that chromatic blue that you just, I don't want to say throw at the top, but it's there at the top and everything is in complement of that stroke. And I just love it. So if you could talk about that, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah, this is an older piece. It's probably from about 2012 or 13 or so, I'd say. It's sort of have started out fairly representationally and kind of blocking in the trees, kind of looking at the negative space around them with the sky and the land there, and very conscious about composition here. So I think in that sense, I'm thinking way more about composition consciously when I'm doing an abstract take on things, because it's got to work that way. I think in some ways, subject wise, if you're doing something more representationally, you might be able to kind of get by without as strong composition. Yeah, sort of being kind of an early one, I was interested in kind of layering those colors and just sort of looking a bit closer here, some of the marks, especially on the ground there, those sort of horizontal things. I kind of wonder how I did that. That's probably with Terry Ludwig. Yeah, around the sky and the trees. I find that really good to seal down a background color, or also to kind of give myself a sharp edge to contrast some softer edges. So when you do an underpainting and it dries, you can go in with the pastel and really kind of incise a sharp kind of edge to give it some variety within the piece. And I can kind of hark back a little bit here, maybe to some of my college education. My first painting instructor was an abstract expressionist. So he really drilled into us composition and all those sort of essential things for painting. So I think it was really instinctual. And that's another thing, like that blue bar there that you mentioned. Again, it's something where just reach into my pastel box. What am I going to do here? It's just exciting. It's like just sort of improv. It's okay, if I grab this and do that, is it going to work? And it's a bold sort of choice. So it's just kind of exciting.
Yeah, it worked. That was gonna be one of my questions is do you remember why or how you did that blue mark? And yeah, it's just one of those things, I guess. You just say, I got to do something and it's somewhere subconsciously you chose that vibrant hue and threw it in there, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I definitely, I think of Terry Ludwig, and the color was just so luscious, and I just thought I'm going to put that in there.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. Now you hit on a point that I think is very important, and I've recently discovered this, is that one of your teachers was an abstract expressionism, but if you want to study composition, I think going towards the abstract, not abstract school, but the abstract way of thinking is essential for understanding composition. Otherwise, you're too involved in compositions that revolve around elements, right? Instead of design. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree for sure. Yeah, I don't have much to add to that, but any piece I'm working on, abstract or representational, it's about the design and how there's dominant shapes and subordinate and dominant colors and subordinate colors. Yeah, I can't say it any better than that. That's just the lens or filter that I see it through. Recently, we're had a treat here in Edmonton. There's a big exhibition of Tom Thompson paintings. Yeah, I've always been an inspiration. I'd say most landscape artists will find him an inspiration. What I really found too with his work is that he has such a great handling of neutrals or grays. If you look at a lot of his paintings, how he handles the grays to sort of show off some of the more intense colors. He's a master at that. So color temperatures, if you go to see that show, color temperatures of his grays, something to really focus on.
You learn so much by looking at the actual work, right? Yeah, photos never do it justice. I mean, we talked a little bit about how you went to your computer airspray there, but do you have any other kind of like tools or specific processes that have you fallen into that you just can't give up when you're painting?
Yeah, I like to start every piece after let's say I've toned it with pastel in this technique of, applying isopropyl alcohol on top of it to seal it. That's one thing. You create a kind of wash. That's a big thing. But beyond that, to start off with a drawing in vine charcoal, sort of blocking in your composition. To me, that's sometimes the most pleasurable part and the most relaxed, because it's sort of just immersing me into that zone of thinking. They help me. It's getting into the right side of the brain, I think. I feel very meditative about it. Changes can be made at this stage. You can edit, you can get a sense of the values, even with the charcoal. So that's a standby for me. If there's too much else,
Okay,
uh,
but I could see that working really well, especially if you do a variety of pastel marks first and then use the wash. Then you kind of already have that variety, that model color texture there that you could probably even work with throughout the piece, right?
oh yeah, I'm not a purist by any means, so I've flicked some paint. I've shot spray paint onto my pastels to get an effect that way. Yeah.
Yeah, that's different. I've never heard anybody doing that before, but yeah, why not, right? Eh?
Yeah. Anything that creates a mark or makes something unexpected is,
Yeah, for sure. I mean, yeah, you kind of caught me off guard with that one. I tell you, I've never heard anybody doing that before. But I guess afterwards, if you're going to fixative it all doesn't matter. I mean, it's just set, right?
yeah.
That saying fixative though, before I
Mm.
get to the other question, how do you finish your pastel work? Do you use a fixative, or do you just kind of knock it from behind to get
Yeah.
rid of the loose stuff?
I have this a little bit of aversion to the fixative because you don't quite know what's going to happen. It does, I've found, change the work. There's better fixatives out there, but I haven't used it really much since kind of college days, probably. It's just a matter of, in terms of presentation and archival concerns, just a matter of framing it correctly so that the glass doesn't touch the artwork. But
Yeah.
it's, yeah, from what I've read, pastels last hundreds of years, so it shouldn't be.
No, it won't be a problem. I mean, when you say better fixative, that's like asking you which leg do you want broken. I mean, there isn't a good solution to it. I mean, I
Yeah,
agree. It'll get rid of the color dance. It just changes the sparkle. It's just something about fixative, right? So
yeah, yeah, just
leaving it,
like,
I haven't worked in pastels for years, but even then I decided can't do it. And I always wonder about people when they go big. Do you find it harder for you to work on a bigger scale? Does any design from your short, small studies that don't work for you on a bigger scale without losing its charm and initial idea?
that's a great question. Yeah. Yeah, working large is a ambition of mine. I have done it. I've gone up to like about 3 by, well, not quite 4 feet, but at least 3 feet by, say, 40 some inches. It's very challenging because unlike with oil painting, you can grab a bigger brush and solve some things that way. Pastels are generally a limited size. You can get some that are larger, but not a lot. It takes a lot of guts for me to start working bigger because of that mark change that has to occur. But I have enjoyed doing it. And I do find that, if something is going to work at a fairly small scale, and this is an old adage that painters kind of work from, that if it does in a thumbnail drawing or very small piece, it will work quite large, like really large. So compositionally, those little guys are just waiting to be blown up into something big. So yeah, I have some exhibitions coming up where I'm planning to have at least some work in increasing the scale of things. And it is a bit more unpredictable for me. So that's probably a reason, I feel safe doing smaller stuff. I like
Mhm.
working fast. The bigger stuff's taking longer. But yeah,
Yeah, I'd love to see bigger pastel works. That'd be amazing.
this one's behind me, 18 by 24, I guess, which
Okay.
not huge, but yeah.
Yeah, it's no 3 feet by 4 feet though. I mean, I can't even imagine using pastels on something that large. All I could be thinking of is, well, there goes $15, right? There's 25. I mean, by the end of
Yeah,
it, you have
yeah.
so much pastel worth in that painting is just, great questions. Thank you very much. Oh, okay. Well, this is perfect for pastels, and I'm pretty sure I know the answer to this, but how important is mark making in your work?
Oh yeah, it's super important. I've always felt like, even when I just kind of started out, as a fledgling kind of painter, I sort of taught myself watercolor. That was the first medium I felt kind of confident in when I was in high school. I always felt that was important, and that to be loose was very important. So, and again, the abstract expressionist teacher background, I think, enforced that a bit. And stuff you talk about with other artists, that's mark making, that term. Yeah, it's just I often like this sort of borderline relationship of a mark just being a mark on its own, and then also meaning something, maybe describing something. But it's kind of like, it's sort of hovers on abstraction. So that's kind of this exciting thing to go into, or could just slip to either side.
Yeah, and I think I don't know why. I think it might be more applicable to pastels. I mean, it's applicable to all mediums, acrylic oil, but for some reason, the pastels, it seems to be more inherent with, right? Just maybe because it's the drawing aspect of pastels. I don't know,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And it's just this weird kind of medium. I think it's between drawing and painting because
Mhm.
it seemed very, very painterly, but you could really use it as a almost pure drawing kind of medium too.
Yeah, without a doubt, right? Yeah, for sure. Now you mentioned that you're working on your bigger pieces for a show. So do you have any galleries or areas that you show in, or is it all local, or is there anything outside of Alberta?
Yeah, I see that question too. Yeah. No, I don't show much in BC. I haven't yet anyway. I have some shows coming up in Edmonton in July, locally, group show in space at the University Hospital, and then a show with my friend Chuck in October. But locally, yeah, just kind of in the gallery shop at the Art Gallery of Alberta, and then also at the Art Gallery of St. Albert. Mostly sold my own work in the last several years, but so I am getting kind of ready to get more gallery representation.
Yeah, I'm sure you have all the paintings stacked up, ready to go, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Now, Deb mentioned something here that I totally forgot about, and because you posted it quite a bit on your Instagram. You recently did a pastel painting on an old book cover. I think you've done a few of them like this. Do you ever use any other unconventional surfaces?
Well, to clarify, it was more oil on book cover, and I'm still
Oh,
doing those. And I want to do more. I've made my own surface with pastel. So you can buy these grounds that are kind of mixed up and apply them to, say, watercolor paper or stuff called gator board. It's like a very firm foam core. You can mix your own using pumice and acrylic gel and stuff like that and create your own surface. I took a class in that several years ago, which is kind of fun. It's a very unpredictable surface, so it doesn't have as much of a uniform pattern. I haven't done pastels on canvas. Doesn't really intrigue me too much. So, yeah, I like working on paper and the sanded paper really.
wait, what do you do now that Wallace isn't around?
Yeah, it's terrible. I made a trade for some artwork of mine to a friend, and I got a bunch of Wallace that she wasn't going to use. So I was just like, gold mine. So I still have some of that, but it's running out. There's one called Lux Archival.
Hmm.
It's fairly similar. It's a little bit softer grit, but yeah, I really wish it would come back. I've spoken with the creator about it, and I don't think there's any chance it will. It was just production problems. And it's unfortunate because so many people love that Wallace paper.
Yeah, there's not a pastellist I know that didn't love that paper, so
Yeah.
it's really unfortunate, but I can
Yeah.
understand the headache that would cost an investment, right? Yeah. Yeah. Now I'm gonna kind of change it up a little bit, do another share. Yeah, Shadows in the Meadows. This one's called. Now read what I said about it because I can't remember it perfectly. Shadows in the Meadow, I'd say, is an exceptional piece for me, particularly. It's a great example of a strong composition with a focus of variety. In fact, the area with the least amount of variety and detail I see is the focal point, which is kind of this greeny grass here. Reversing the idiom that detail is what draws you in. You've kind of changed it, flipped it on its head, right? What was your experience and process for this piece, if you can remember?
Yeah. Yep. It's a bit of an older piece too. Thank you. That was intriguing to work on. I like a lot of things that happen in shadows, like temperature changes, and there was this field of yellow flowers. Can't remember exactly what they were. And a little trip to Elk Island a while back. I knew I just kind of wanted to play up that sort of bluish green stuff that was happening in the shadows there. And then the top sort of third of it, oh yeah, that was one of those ones where I just fell into the zone and I didn't really participate too much. I was just following kind of unseen directions. And a lot of that stuff, because it's so many colors in there, it just sort of a really light sort of application of the pastel. So sometimes I talk about when I'm putting the marks on, it's so delicate that I'll drop the pastel because it's just like the weight of the pastel making those marks. So that, yeah, creating just those sort of veils of color was very exciting. And I was sort of thinking kind of an impressionist kind of approach on that. Yeah, I love kind of putting in those shafts of light. It's just kind of a joy to create that saturated color. So
Yeah, especially against those darks there. Because it's
yeah,
interesting when I look at this piece, and I'm sure if I saw it in person, it's just full of marks. Like this is epitome of detail, 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 detail. But it's unseen in a sense because all this is pretty much equal in value, and it creates a sense of variety and context more than anything. Whereas 99% of the time, I think you're just staring at this bright green yellow, right? It's just so
Yeah.
vibrant. And it just reinforces the fact that these things that we learn about focal points and compositions, they're just something that are there that you don't have to follow, right? Take it with a grain of salt and just move on.
Yeah, that kind of thing about, yeah, the little spotlight of light or color is things that when I was studying graphic design when I went back to college, it's a design principle too, like we were talking. So this big, dark kind of shadow area can be totally balanced by some small little blast of light.
Yeah, for sure. Now, with all these pieces, not all, but the majority that I found, I found a lot that I really liked on Instagram, but some of these older pieces, of course, I found on your website, which you don't really have. You use Saatchi, which kind of surprised me. I think you're the only artist I know that uses Saatchi for their primary domain. So talk about a little bit of business of art. How are you finding that platform for just posting your
Oh,
art?
not good, really.
Oh, okay.
No, I've had a couple of sales from there years ago, but yeah, I've sort of let my website expire. My intention was to do a new one and still is.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, it's going to be back up there sometime. But I'm just much more active on Instagram and posting on my Facebook art page too. So yeah, my visibility is a bit lower that way, I think, more recently because I haven't had the website up for maybe 2 or 3 years.
Oh, okay. That would explain why I couldn't find it then. There you go. I thought
Yeah.
you had a strategy going on.
I think somebody had a question about a plein air workshop I saw in the
Oh
chat.
yeah, yeah. Are you planning on doing any group plein air paintings this summer? Sorry, I missed that one.
Yes. Yeah. About the last week of August, I think, at the Paint Spot in Edmonton. We're planning to do, yeah, 5 days of plein air in and around the city, different venues, different subjects. So yeah, really looking forward to that. Yeah. And sometimes like occasionally I kind of throw it out there on social media about going out for a day or something to do some plein air. So I might do that as well.
Nice, nice. 5 days. That's quite intensive, but I guess it's nice in the sense that each day is a new location, right?
Yeah, and you just, yeah, after traveling around so much, you have a good sort of sense of what will work with some people and particular times of year. And
Oh
yeah,
yeah, yeah. Especially the fall and the spring, but don't get me started on that. So one of the hardest questions I think for artists to answer is how do you know you're finished? Kind of what's your answer to that?
I don't have a huge problem with it. I think the volume of work that I've done, that helps. The more you've done, the easier it is to decide. I can definitely get frustrated if I've overdone something, and that's when, yeah, I try to mess it up a bit or blow some off or something to get back some freshness to it. So, I mean, realistic stuff, it's very easy to know when you're done. But yeah, doing slightly more abstract or impressionistic, I tend to err on the side of a slightly more unfinished look than overdone. And that just kind of pushes more buttons, I think, in terms of just personal satisfaction with, being able to kind of state something simply. That's a hard task to state something simply and be comfortable with that.
Yeah, the confidence that comes with it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's putting in the miles, right?
Yes. Yep.
Without a doubt, for sure. Now that kind of leads me to my next question as well is how do you work? Do you kind of just work on one piece in its entirety till it's done, or do you have kind of multiple on the go and you kind of just switch and back and forth
It's been
until they
both.
each evolved?
Yeah, it's been both. I have a studio in Edmonton. I'm not in there as much as say if I was living in Edmonton right now. In a studio setting, when I have private studio and I got walls, I got a lot of work up on the wall because I like to look at it and see over a period of weeks or months how it affects me. If I might all of a sudden think of something to do to something or whatever. So I like that aspect of seeing a bunch of work at a time. Generally, I wouldn't like be one that would do a little bit of work on this and then do a little bit of work on that and a little bit on another. I pretty much focus on one at a time, but I might not quite finish something and start something else if I don't know what to do with it and just
Mm,
leave the other piece
yeah.
and then
So you kind of get to the 95% stage and then kind of move on to get fresh eyes later, right?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Here's an interesting question. There's a lot in this one sentence, but I'll pinpoint it. It says, "What is your favorite subject matter at the moment?" But this I really love. What about your current color scene? Are you currently in a color scheme mind that you always go to lately?
Okay. The first part was sort of what's my current muse or
Yeah. What is your current subject matter? Yeah.
yeah, where I'm living, Fort Saskatchewan, just a bit east of here, maybe 15 minutes or so, a little drive out there. is an area that's kind of commonly referred to as the sand hills. So it's a very sandy area, kind of scrubby trees, kind of unlike other parts that I've painted before. So I do like, and it's a bit desolate looking too. There's a lot of like burnt trees and like
Oh
just
man, sounds fantastic.
yeah. Yeah, it's sort of a painter's paradise. So my friend Chuck and I have been going out there recently. And it's also nice because there's not a lot of people around. And it's a lot of the land seems like it's just sort of owned by companies. There's like a lot of oil wells and stuff out there. So you can be kind of confident just sort of parking and just kind of skittling into the woods or the side there without bothering you. I like the palette of it. So I'd say in terms of the second part, I really like neutral colors. I like my grays and stuff like that I mentioned before. So yeah, kind of leaning that way palette wise, a muted palette.
So nothing except no more vibrant blues, eh? Mostly all neutrals now, eh?
Well, yeah, it's on the spur of the moment that might happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, never say never.
Yeah, you never know, right? Who knows? Might be inspired by I don't know, Red Barn in the distance. I don't know. Do they got red barns in Alberta? I can't remember. They
Oh
probably
yeah,
do. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, and yeah, I love abandoned buildings, so
Oh
uh,
yeah,
we did a few of those recently, and yeah, it's always kind of fun.
no doubt. Yeah, abandoned buildings in BC are probably a lot different than abandoned buildings in and around the fort, eh? So
Yeah,
much more, yeah, historical or rough, right? For sure, for sure.
yeah, and also yeah, like just piles of wood, like deadfall and stuff like that. I find kind of interesting.
Yeah, that'd be amazing. Now, talking about all this difficult subject matter, though, what do you find the most difficult aspect of painting? Or is there one thing?
Yeah, in terms of landscape in particular. Yeah, I mentioned the scale, I guess that would be something that challenges me doing the scale. I really like to challenge myself, so I don't like if I've fallen into a pattern of repeating what I've done a lot or if I haven't, yeah, kind of pushed things. So not falling into sort of habitual things. Like I have my habits of preparing me for doing the painting, but I don't want to always have a standard kind of way of doing something where I know exactly what's going to happen. So I want to surprise myself along the journey, and I think most painters do. So that's a big thing. Is just kind of that personal, oh, this is yeah, something's happened here, and you
Yeah,
just can't control it. It's an unseen kind of hand that does it, and you're just along for the ride.
that's so interesting. Yeah, because the long I can equate it to my own experience. The longer I painted, it isn't the outcome; it's the process that's exhilarating, that's exciting, is what drives me. And if what I get at the end is a result I can come to terms with, I'm happy, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it sounds like the same. Interesting. Now, one last question came in. I know you work a lot on gray paper. Smart choice. Have you ever tried to start on a bright, saturated paper?
Yep, for sure. I've done like saturated sort of pinks and oranges, and generally I'd use a warm ground, and it's usually more neutral, sometimes a gray or a brown or a browny orange. But I've also done some cool grounds, which is sort of a little more out of my comfort zone, like to have a cool ground for something, because I think for me, I'd have to think a bit more about color choices because I'm so used to the warm grounds. But yeah, I love a hot ground. It's pretty fun to work on.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. I'm the same way. Give me a warm or a hot ground, but a cool ground, it's like something feels really weird, eh?
Yeah,
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 but it's fantastic. It stretches your brain, right?
yep. Mhm.
Absolutely. That's a great
Mhm.
question. Thank you for that. Now, we're going to ask two more questions of you, Dave. One is, what's the best piece of advice you have ever been given?
Okay, yeah, I knew you could save this one, and I don't have really a prepared answer. I don't know if there's been somebody said to me directly, best piece of advice, but I think it's kind of boring, but perseverance. If you get any iota of pleasure or satisfaction from doing any kind of art, you should keep doing it no matter what kind of success you might have or might not have. Just keep doing it and something will happen just by that process of picking away at it and just going away at it without sort of fear of anything. So perseverance and I think sort of humility before your canvas or your paper keeps you grounded. So things can go south at any time and they can also, you know, turn out great. So it's what kind of keeps you working at it is just this great mystery of moving forward and not knowing what's going to happen.
Yeah, I love that that whole idea of perseverance. It's a good one. No matter what happens, just do what you need to do,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
And at a certain point, you just keep persevering and it's just normal.
Yeah.
In the beginning, it's harder, but you know,
Oh, without a doubt.
you don't
Yeah.
want to, you're less likely to give it up the longer you do it.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely right. Now, I hope the answer to this next question is different from this, but what would be your top piece of advice to give others?
Let's see. It's not super specific, but oh yeah, I've said that I think in that article that I wrote a bit about before, but develop some habits that make you sort of comfortable in the sense of you're relaxed as you start something. Don't put undue stress on yourself, but sort of get into conditions where you're more likely to access that kind of zone that you want to be in. And things will happen when you're not looking. Like we were talking about before. Yeah, the perseverance comes into that. But just like for me, as I mentioned, I always like to start with a kind of solid sort of drawing. If I'm doing something pastel and I start with the vine charcoal drawing. So that really relaxes me and kind of just puts me into a feeling of confidence. And, I know what I'm doing here. You've done it so many times. You just get into that kind of practice. So um, try to incorporate stuff like that that just makes you feel confident. That makes sense.
Oh, yeah, I think it does. I think that's great advice. And I think if I can add to it, don't worry if you can't find something right away, it'll find you. You'll just fall into this process that you do at the beginning and then you'll have it. So don't be frustrated if it doesn't jump out at you, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I always often tell my students, don't be too critical of yourself, especially when you're starting out. If you've gone a little ways, okay, you can start to be more sort of look at your stuff with more of a critical eye. But when you're just starting, like you can't shoot yourself down too much. And in a way, you haven't earned it yet. You haven't put in those miles of work to be able to really look at it. So you've got to give yourself room at the beginning to yeah, make mistakes because that's how you're going to learn.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's a great way to say it. You haven't really earned earned that right to be critical of your work yet. Absolutely. That's fantastic. I love that. Should get a shirt, that. All right, saying that, it's just after 7. I want to thank everyone for coming. Now, for David, if you want to find him online, he's at sachiart.com. David Shko, SHKO. And his handle on Instagram is David Shko or Dave Shko, Dave SHKO on Instagram. And thank you very much, Dave. I really appreciate your time here. I found it fascinating, like I do with all the interviews. It's great. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Michael. Yeah, it's great to connect here and I hope to keep up our communication.
Oh yeah, it'd be wonderful, man. One day I'll get out there.
As a side note, Michael, for everybody, he let me know that he also spent some time in Fort Saskatchewan, where I'm living now, as a youth. So we also have that in common.
Oh yeah, you just all the memories come flooding back to me without a doubt. And thank you to everybody who attended. I really appreciate it. And a big thank you to everyone who asked questions as well. Until next time, take care of yourself, Dave.
You too. Thanks, everybody. Really enjoyed it, Michael. Thanks a lot.
All right, my pleasure. Cheers, everyone. Take care. Good night.